behalf of Seattle Parks and Recreation.
Town Planning and the current chair of Board of Commissioners.
So we wanted to maybe start out with the classification policy and talk about that first. We think that's a good lead and a segue into the natural area and green spaces use guidelines discussion. I wanted to kind of give a high-level overview on why we thought it was important to make changes to the park classification policy. A little bit of background. This is mostly an administrative tool that, from a budgeting standpoint and a reporting standpoint, allows us to communicate to the public on how we're using budgets allocated for park maintenance process system. One of the things that came out of the park district discussion with the community is sort of this desire of more accountability from parks. How are you using our taxpayer resources to fund park maintenance? To the extent that we have a tool in place that allows us to track where we spend resources on an FTE hourly basis, having a park classification system that is in alignment with our budget tools and our timesheet work order tracking system allows us to make those reports more efficiently. So this change was made with the expectation that on an annual or semi-annual basis, we would need to be reporting on the level of maintenance function across the park system. The other thing that I wanted to clarify about these changes is we heard significant public comment when this was discussed at the Board of Park Commissioners meeting. People were concerned that changes to the park classification system would create or allow other uses in a park that maybe was previously not allowed, but because of the classification change might be allowed or would be allowed. That's not the case here. What this does is, well, let me back up. So in cases where we have a park that has a master plan or a park that has some pre-existing plan, the park classification guidelines are subservient to existing master plans. So we don't imagine that the park classification guidelines change use. Our procedures for changing the use of a park is for those recommendations to go back to the Board of Park Commissioners. The Park Board deals with land use changes, i.e. the Cheesty mountain bike trail proposal was required to go to the Board of Park Commissioners. So if there was ever a contemplated change in the use of a park that is not currently happening, the park classification would not allow it to happen. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think by way of clarification is we don't think that the park classification changes impact the GSP goals, so the Green Sail Partnership goals that we have right now. We don't view this as something that is going to be a barrier to that energy and effort that volunteers are investing. It really is going to compromise that anyway. So just at a high level, I wanted to kind of set the stage for Suzanne to talk through the classification process and kind of how we ended up here.
Thank you, Christopher.
You bet.
So I think also as outlined a little bit in the one pager that you all received, that when we started doing the planning for the Parks Legacy Plan document and then also getting ready for the ballot measure, and had been asked by the city budget office and the mayor's office to really produce some hard numbers. We realized that there was a disconnect with the way some of our parks are classified. And so it was at that point, so almost 2.5 years ago, maybe closer to 3, is when we did the original shift in the classification. And with the schedule, with the ballot measure, it did not go to the park board. That probably, in hindsight, it would have been better if it had gone at the beginning of the process, but it didn't. So when we decided that we wanted to bring it forward, and I think in speaking to some of you outside of this meeting, I realize that the perception is that the timing has been a little off on the sequencing on that, and so I think we just have to acknowledge that the timing was not optimal. But this is an operational and administrative policy. The other reason for moving forward with the update right now is that we added 17 new parcels and parks to, specifically to the natural area and greenbelt category. We also, for our organizational practices, created a new division which entails the regional parks. And in order to create the regional parks category within the classification system, we felt that there was we moved some parks into that to create that new section. And those are a lot of the parks that Christopher was alluding to that have either landmark districts, historic significance, they have pre-existing master plans that have already been approved. They also have oftentimes large areas that are maintained in a natural state. And we recognize all of that, and we thought it was also very, very important to state that these changes do not supersede those existing master plans. And this is also not meant to be static. It is something that we come back every few years and sort of update as we have new acquisitions. They need to be placed in one of the categories. And so we did go through a lengthy process with the Board of Park Commissioners. I think we had three meetings and public hearing. And then the Park Board gave their recommendation to the superintendent that we should move forward with the update. So I think I'm going to stop on that for right now and ask if there's any questions or want to have some more dialogue.
I have a question.
Sure.
It's not, so this classification system, I understand, is more of a county management effort. And it's not supposed to, it's being informed by the master plans for existing park spaces. Does that include the vegetation master plans as well?
No, so this is really site master plans, like the Discovery Park master plan.
Development master plan. Yeah.
Questions under resources. There are two websites.
Under resources.
On the one sheet.
Oh,
Yeah. Those two websites. Would one or both of them contain information on the current classification system that is the name of every class? Because we've only been told about changes, not what the whole picture looks like. And then also, would it also contain the list of all the parks and what each one is classified?
yes. So both of those sites have, you can access both documents from these sites. So there is one that went to the Board of Park Commissioners that shows the previous wording in the policy. There was a red line document that showed all the word by word what was changed in each category. And there was also an accompanying document that showed every single park in our inventory, what it was previously classified as and what the proposed new classification was. So that is all part of what went to the Board of Park Commissioners, and it's part of the archive of the meeting minutes and documentation through that. And then on the policy, it now is the current updated policy. So that the policy will not show you the previous, it will only show you the current.
Just one question so I'm just so I can also help better explain it to other people that ask. There's the sort of description, like a physical, built environment, natural environment, and under specialty, not to get in too much into the weeds, but it was just one thing that stood out. Under natural environment, there's categories like natural area, environmental benefits. So a
On the different assets and attributes.
Yeah, I just don't, just not knowing the full piece behind it. The specialty use parks and specialty gardens, such as like Pagoda Gardens and Camp Long, say natural areas, none. And so just what does that mean? Because I think that sort of stands out to people who know those parks.
And you and I talked about that, and I think that that should probably be changed.
Oh, okay.
So there's one category that is for special use or specialty parks, and within that we put parks such as Pagoda Gardens, Camp Long, that are really kind of, and the Arboretum, they're very, very standalone. And that Johanna and I have talked about it, and that was a mistake. It should have included natural areas or areas that are in natural state as a component and an asset in that. And I think we could probably make that amendment very easily without any problem.
Just trying to understand what's involved. So you're saying that if, that all of the things that have classification as natural areas or green spaces, none of that's changed by your larger classifications, they'll still remain within those plans?
So with the original document, actually the wording for what's included or the assets and attributes for a natural area and green space, none of that changed between the previous version and the updated version. So none of the description of those areas have changed. And all of the parks that are outlined in the 1993 City's Open Space Policy and were called out specifically for natural areas and greenbelts are included in that classification within the park classification policy. What has changed is that previously there were some parks, such as Discovery Park, Magnuson Park, that were moved into the regional park category because of their attributes, because of their landmark status, and because of the existing master plans and the way that they are used and managed, so it allowed a better fit for us to track. So an example, and I think I had that in the memo, when you think about things such as parks such as Discovery Park or Magnuson, very intensive use, a lot of activity there. There's a lot of people coming, enjoying the area, using the restrooms, using the garbage cans. The level of maintenance that's required for that is very different than, say, the Duwamish Greenbelt.
I understand
So
there's increased maintenance.
So
but
that is the part of the rationale in the creation of the regional parks category, was allow us to manage them in a much more efficient way with our crews and fiscal.
Okay, but is there somewhere in this, and I didn't do a thorough looking, but was trying to distinguish between green spaces, and I noted the Parks Department said there was, in terms of what we call green spaces, something like 795 acres were classified, and you tried to break down. And then it listed developed areas in parks, but I didn't see, is there a number for what's called natural?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
It was one of the classifications of the Parks Department, a thing of what a listing that broke down like how many different parks were in categories and stuff like that. It was sort of just an info thing, and I didn't see, I saw the green spaces, I saw the total area of parks that the Parks Department has. What I didn't see was how many, quote, acres you consider natural areas.
It's a lot larger than that, so that's why I was asking what you were.
acres.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure. There wasn't.
It's a little-
And does natural areas include green spaces, or are they separate?
So per the parks classification, I think our acreage is a little lower than that number, Christopher. So when, in the document that Donna was just asking about, where there's the full list, it has the acreage of every single site. And so we have, and I don't have that off the top of my head, but there's the acreage that's within the parks classification
In each park area?
and of natural areas and green belts. And then within a lot of other parks, we also have areas that are maintained in a natural state. And so we don't have that acreage is not called out in the parks classification system.
I think an example would be, just going back to Camp Long, it's
Yeah.
designated or classified as a regional, specialty use. But it does also have natural area that will be maintained as natural area. So if you were to just add up all the parks that are classified under the title as greenbelt, natural area,
greenbelts,
it's
then
going to be that much plus Discovery Park, other regional parks that include natural areas.
that's
So-
correct. That's correct.
So there's natural areas within some of the designations, but I'm not sure if that's the terminology you're using, but what we sort of walk around thinking of as natural areas.
That's correct. In almost every category, with the exception of downtown parks, almost every other park classification contains areas that are maintained in a natural state within them.
So this is.
And this is, so what I just handed I didn't pull the 565 list of parks. I only grabbed the policy section, but it is available, and I can also send it to you if you like.
What I'm trying to, so then if I go to the larger one, the link there, I will find a breakdown of how much natural areas are in each of your parks, what's classified as natural areas?
You will find out the acreage for each park per classification.
Not, yeah, I mean.
So
just
like
check-
you won't
I
see,
won't- I mean, what I'm asking is to take an
Yeah.
example, how much of Discovery Park is natural area
So-
versus developed area? Is
Okay,
that a big?
yeah, can I do that in the next briefing?
All right.
It's
Yeah,
not,
no,
it's not in the classification policy is the short answer. That's not part of the classification nor the intent of the
That's where it
classification policy.
it's where it becomes confusing, I think, to the public using these terms in a general sense. And, you know, you could say a natural area is that space where, you know, like you don't do anything to it, it's a bunch of group of trees in say, around Green Lake, and maybe there's an area where you don't do anything,
Right.
anything special.
We have one more question before you jump into that.
On this.
On the classification?
Right, so, and
Okay.
I apologize, I went through this the other night and now I'm like somehow, some of my thoughts off. But I just wanted to make sure I followed the logic, because I think I support it and I think it really helps to make maintenance clear for people. And I think this really does identify that. So, but I wanted to understand, and I don't want to go through 585 parks, so I'm just
Sure.
going to pick
That's okay.
one and another one, okay? So from this angle, Seward Park,
Seward Park is a regional. Classified as a regional,
so what,
I believe.
did it just not get in this list?
I just said, I
Oh,
give some
examples
examples.
include, okay.
So I mean, I can give you
No,
others.
no,
that are in the
that's good, I
regional.
just, when I didn't see it, I was reading the sentence wrong, okay.
And so
that-
as we
then
know-
the logic, it works,
Yeah.
okay, great. And then, shoot, I'm gonna get this name wrong, but in recreation areas, there are, like Magnuson Park obviously is high regional recreational use. What about, the name of the park is not the right name, the park at High Point? That regional fields?
Oh,
that get-
sure.
Oh, it's-
So,
Wait,
I know what you're talking about.
it's got a different name. It's got,
so previously we had a classification category that was just recreation areas. And we felt that that was actually a little,
Walter Hunley Park,
right.
yes.
Say again.
Walter Hunley Park.
I know,
Playfield.
I knew Walt. Okay.
so we also felt that just having parks designated as recreation areas didn't do justice to all the other elements that were there. I think sort of the examples that you were just giving, and that really, that they were broader uses going on at the same time. We have very few just standalone athletic complexes. There's one or two, but very few and not enough to really warrant.
You know, so I think the lesson here, what we're trying to say is that a park can be a regional park and can have some areas that overlap around the neighborhood park, can have the same amenities as a playfield.
Right.
But there's this sort of idea that there's this overlap. And we are using sort of the broader sort of majority uses to define what type park it is. So you're going to find some natural areas in a big regional park. You're going to find some playfields and some high-use recreational areas in a big regional park. But I think how the public uses the park, how we program and activate the park, and kind of its size help us kind of characterize or type class these parks.
Well, I think it's a good idea.
I have one other comment, and you maybe didn't originate the term, but when I look at the classification, the boulevards, green streets, and greenways, and one of our discussion was SDOT that came out was greenways doesn't mean that there are trees even along that street. It's for meaning that you're using low-impact transportation like a bicycle or walking. And I, would think maybe you might want to recommend some clarification on that, or maybe a name change, or an agreement that with SDOT that they need to plant trees if they want to call it a greenway. That's not sufficient just to say, hey, it's an area one can walk on, because it's just the overuse of the word, we're getting this problem, natural green spaces, greenways, it's just becomes a little bit confusing of what does it actually mean. And the public, I saw that, and I thought, well, that meant, it meant like going through, the Arboretum or something, there's all these trees along the street. And it means nothing like that, so it is confusing to people looking at it.